In 2009, a user on the Something Awful forums going by the name Victor Surge posted these as part of a Photoshop contest. The images appear to be normal black and white photos, but with a mysterious tall figure in the background. A few years later, this character, this Slender Man, is an internet icon. Honestly, where else were you going to start with creepypastas? Slender Man is like the Bugs Bunny, the Mickey Mouse of early 2010s internet horror. You've got all these kooky characters, but he's always in the middle. He's the main guy, the mascot. I think my first exposure to Slender Man might have been at a Toys R Us of all places. I remember there being some kind of Slender Man figure next to one of Billy the Puppet from Saw, which is weird because those were both at Toys R Us, but that's not important. That anecdote gives some context to where Slender Man was in our culture at the time. He was still a horror character, but all the mystique around him was completely gone, and I think that's a bit of a shame. I look at those original photos with the captions that the original guy wrote, and there is something particularly unnerving about them. This mysterious looming entity in the background that's connected to all these disappearances for who knows what reason. It's creepy, and I think actually inspired a lot of online horror media to come. These pictures and descriptions fit right in with any kind of analog horror. Slender the 8 Pages pioneered a lot too, being one of the first wholly jump scare based short experience horror games that got really popular through Let's Play. You have Slender to thank for Huggy Wuggy Garten of Ban. It's hard to get into the legacy of Slender Man without talking about a certain incident, but I'll save that for a later video, so how about we talk about all the OG Slender media. Marble Hornets is an online horror series that came out shortly after Slender's creation, and as a result inspired a lot of tropes that come with him. The camera static, the drawings, the iconic Slender Man symbol. Hopefully this isn't a Has-Been Hotel situation. I wasn't gonna watch through it because I thought it would be nothing but Blair Witch walking around footage in each episode, and then ooh, Slender shows up at the end. But you know what? I was right, I called it. Having the story explained to me through a separate video, it actually sounds gripping, but I couldn't make heads or tails of it. Our protagonist looks through old tapes relating to a friend's student film, but finds himself haunted by a mysterious figure who starts going after the rest of the cast. A bunch of stuff happens, memory loss is a recurring theme. Back in the day, YouTube used to have a feature where you could reply to videos with videos, so they take full advantage of that to tell a story from multiple angles. It shows its age, but for what it accomplished through the medium of online video, it's certainly an achievement. Contrary to what I thought going in, Marble Hornets didn't invent the idea of a proxy. In the show, there are masked individuals, and many characters are affected mentally by Slender, but nobody is brainwashed into doing Slender Man's bidding in the way we think. That came from a few Marble Hornets adjacent projects, and spun off into its own mythos, wherein Slender Man and a bunch of other creepypasta characters live in a mansion, and sometimes they're funny anime boys who get into wacky slice-of-life shenanigans. That whole mythos diluted the Slender Man myth even further than it already was. Does anyone remember that one webcomic where Jeff the Killer was Slender Man's apprentice, and they lived in a weird underworld and they had to go up to the human dimension? I just looked it up, it was called Pasta Monsters. Apparently the dub I watched as a kid is completely lost. Sucks, this was a really specific memory. I was able to find the comic itself in full, so maybe that'll be a future video, if making 30 videos back to back doesn't do me in. One thing I strongly dislike is the Slender Man song, you ever heard that? This guy's reading off a Wikipedia page for the guy, while trying to fit it into whatever melody he can come up with. I only listened to it in full for the first time this year, and I'm sorry to anyone who was scared by it. I remember getting it confused with that Sympathy for Slender Man song by Animation Domination. Slender went from a scary urban legend to a meme character to the ringleader of a bunch of anime boys, or something to put in your internet cartoon for no real reason other than to get clicks. A joke, basically. As of 2014, people were starting to move on. It wasn't scary anymore. Other things captured the public's imagination. Even worse were certain events that would happen later on, and would seal its fate as a thing of the past, but we'll get into that later. Thanks for watching, everybody. I know this is kind of experimental. Hopefully the YouTube algorithm is merciful to these, because we got 29 more. Jeff the Killer is not a good creepypasta. When I say the story is bad, I mean bad. Not just on a storytelling level, but the mechanics of it. Spelling, grammatical errors, tense switching, and this weird phrasing. Jeff and his family had just moved into a new neighborhood. His dad had gotten a promotion at work, and they thought it would be best to live in one of those fancy neighborhoods. Jeff and his brother couldn't complain though. What is there to complain about? Fancy neighborhood, I guess. Very plain descriptions and sentence structure. The story isn't even scary. The bully characters are cartoonishly evil. Despite living in an upper-class neighborhood, it's the kind of place where you get held up at gunpoint for lunch money at the bus stop, and people bring guns to a child's birthday party. You can tell this was written by someone who was younger and or didn't have much experience with putting a story together. There's attention drawn to things that maybe don't need to be. I don't know why we needed descriptions of Jeff having to pick out something to wear to the small child's birthday party he's invited to, or him at the birthday party being offered to play cowboys with the other kids. It doesn't add anything, and don't tell me it's symbolism, because if an author spells the word juvie, J-U-V-Y, I don't think they were paying enough attention to the story to think of that. I've heard people point out how it's unusual to have Jeff and his parents invited to a little kid's party, and you know what, I agree, but in the author's defense, this is one weird part of the story that could be explained if the parents of the kids were like PTA people, or we saw more of the parents trying to fit in, maybe have that tie in thematically to Jeff's descent into madness, I don't know. I'm thinking about this too much, like the author thinking too much about how Jeff got his iconic white hoodie. We did not need an explanation for that. The way Jeff starts losing it comes out of nowhere. I dislike that trope wherein a main character with no previous psychological issues or history of violence discovers murder and it's like a drug and he gets addicted to it. I know the lazy alternative would be to make him, ooh, disturbed, he used to torture small animals, he came from a broken home. So I'm glad it's not that, but it makes it unbelievable if there's no basis for it in the story. And there's no slow decline after that. Jeff goes to the hospital and suddenly he's like, nyahaha, look at me mommy, I'm perfect, I cut my face off. I also think it's funny that the mom's reaction to this is to tell the dad to get the gun, not to help their kid. Funnily enough, there was a rewrite of the story in 2015 that added a lot more characterization, kind of like what I was talking about. Unfortunately, that version has its own problems and doesn't redeem the story by any means. I was surprised to find that Seswar person wasn't the originator of the story itself. His version of the Jeff mythos is far more comedic, wherein Jeff slips on a bar of soap and accidentally splashes the tub of acid he was carrying on his face. Yeah, all he had is the name. The brother Liu in the story and the picture. He's like the Bob Kane of Jeff the Killer. Jeff was a big hit. Like Slenderman, there are a lot of derivative works and spin-offs, other characters. I think the Jeff mythos, however, is harder to understand because while Slender has these definitive pockets of canon, like Marble Hornets or the Slender Mansion, the Jeff mythos is relatively more obscure. There's Jane the Killer, whose original story is a letter to Jeff. In line with most anime boy Jeff the Killer fan art, she also happens to be conventionally attractive, so you can have them ship together if you want. The killer OCs are something people used to complain about a lot, like Sonic or My Little Pony recolors. I do actually understand how it can dilute something with a more mature fanbase, but it's not really acceptable to go after this kind of thing anymore, so I won't. Honestly, I prefer the cartoony Eddsworld Jeff over the anime thing. I think it's really appealing how simple he looks. No doubt this originated from Pasta Monsters, but the reach of this design stretches outside there. Jeff the Killer Blood woke up a ton of memories of these goofy creepypasta animations. Such a great time. I love the earnest quality of old Flash animations, and how it's recognized as an aesthetic now. People go a little overboard in places whenever they try to replicate it, in my opinion. Quit all the awesome faces and X3 mouths. All you really need is that classic square brush and a basic knowledge of tweening to make something in line with the times. That's why they call it classic tween in newer versions of Flash. I don't remember Jeff the Killer awoken by this, but the creator did everything in their power to make it look like it was stolen from 3 other things. It's like when you see pictures pre-2020 that retroactively look like AI. The inconsistent art style, subtitles that don't match with the song, the watermark that isn't the creator's current username. I was ready to go on a lost media hunt, but there it is. Most of Jeff the Killer's modern reputation comes from the image, which is still frightening to a lot of people. As of writing this, they haven't found that original unedited picture of whoever this is, but according to a video by some ordinary gamers, there's a chance it's lost forever. The biggest lead is this Japanese internet figure Mariko, who fell into this whole predicament and ended with people back then agreeing to scrub as many pictures of her off the web as possible. So if it is Mariko, then that probably means it's lost for good. Whoops. The Jeff story met the fate of a lot of once iconic pastas, with the likes of Sonic.exe and The Government Wants Your Penis. Jeff the Killer has fared better in reputation, I like to think because of nostalgia and the mystery surrounding the image, also because no real-life incidents happened based on him. What? The image I'm about to show you is cursed, said to have profoundly negative effects on those who view it. paranoia, nausea, seizures. View at your own risk. The smile dog, or smiling dog, according to this lovely individual, is an image attached to a famous creepypasta story. According to it, people who view smile.jpg or smile dog suffer negative physical and psychological effects. People are urged to spread the word whenever they get an email or message containing the image. It's one of those cases where the image is far more popular than the story, but it's not like Jeff where the story is bad. I actually really like the original Smile tale. In fact, I'll summarize it for you here. The author goes to see a woman named Mary for an interview, only to find her locked in her room. This is because of smile.jpg, a supposed cursed image that's been haunting her ever since she got a hold of it. The reason for the hysterics was because she intended to pass on the curse to our main character, but decided not to at the last minute. After some more exposition from Mary about the image and some sleuthing by the author, he gets a mysterious email containing the elusive smile.jpg and then proceeds to make it all our problem. Thanks, dude. It's the first of these stories with some kind of twist. It's professionally written with, prose and everything. The inclusion of old internet tech terminology is great and helps sell the realism. I think the tone of the email the author gets sent by Mary is a little too close to his normal writing to believe, but it's a minor complaint. The Ring-esque idea that looking at the smile dog will somehow end you probably had a lot of people quivering in their boots back then. Chain emails were still a thing at the time, so there's some plausibility to it being real. One day you open up your inbox to see it. Woo! I was gonna say that we don't see chainmail stuff nowadays, but we do. Like/repost for good luck, or else your month will be bad on Twitter and Instagram. Every single week, there's another one of those, and I fall for it every time. Chainmail and info hazard related horror always gets to me. Not because I'm gullible, I hope. But it's like you're putting some kind of responsibility on the reader. Do the thing, or else, My name is Carmen Winstead. I am 17 years old. I was never particularly freaked out by Smile Dog. A lot of fan art has the dog be a pet to some other creepypasta character, and I love all the fan art of them as a cool, edgy warrior cat looking thing. Oh, okay. How much do you think Smile.jpg inspired Sonic.exe? They both have file names in the titles, and if you witness them, evil things happen. Just saying. At the dawn of the 2010s, a 4chan user going by Redbubble recounts his eerie experience with a mysterious cartridge of The Legend of Zelda Majora's Mask. Strange glitches start occurring, Link gets teleported around, textures are messed up, characters appear where they're not supposed to, and more. Redbubble, it's customary to mention the OP's stupid sounding name that no one can pronounce, finds out that the save file Ben was named after a deceased child, and that somehow the soul of the child is trapped inside the game. At the end of the original story, it's implied that Ben escapes through his computer. How many times am I going to say the word pioneer in these early entries? Ben Drowned pioneered the haunted video game story. It's so essential that reading it again makes it feel cliche. It started the guy getting the game from a random place, describing in detail the strange happenings, and eventually being scared out of their minds by whatever goes on. It's weird how the game upsets the OP so much, compared to what we know now from these types of stories. All the glitches that we see in the accompanying videos do not look like the work of a ghost or digitized soul of a child. But this was 2009. ROM hacking and the knowledge surrounding it was not as sophisticated as it is today. People saw this back in the day like the equivalent of running out of the theater when the train pulls into the station. Majora's Mask is a pretty dark game compared to what people knew from Nintendo at the time. A lot of characters in emotional distress, and fans of the game always bring up a general melancholic and creepy tone. I don't know about that though, I played the bad 3DS port and didn't like it. From what the game is, it makes sense to form a scary story around it. There are things you could pull from in the game that roll over into your own piece of horror fiction, like the Link statue you can summon. I'm sorry, it's going in the camp of things that are funny now. Say cheese! And die. The story of Ben Drowned doesn't end there. There's an entire ARG attached to it that concluded a few years ago. I'm gonna be honest, I'm not a fan of ARGs. They're probably fun to participate in, but if I'm experiencing the story outside of that, I always feel like there's a lot of trudging through explanations of websites and random 10-second YouTube clips. It doesn't contribute to the narrative in any meaningful way after the fact, and a lot of horror YouTubers seem to think that stuff is way more interesting than it actually is. So there's something about a cult and a company that wants to digitize people's souls and put them into a digital world because of some tragic event that'll happen sometime in the future. And Ben is actually an acronym for Behavioral Energy Network or something, and it's a FNAF-entered amalgamation of a bunch of computerized souls, and it ends with a new character having to play the game. The setup is intriguing, even though it's far removed from the down-to-earth original 4chan post. If you want a brief explanation, I encourage you to watch this video I found by Game Domain. I refuse to watch a 12-hour compilation explaining every part of the ARG website and every gameplay video. Put on that peanut Peanut Butter Gamer. Classic. I've implied it, but the Ben story doesn't hold up that well. Haunted video games have come a long way, and many other stories have done what it does. The modern ARG elements are a little too fantastical, and honestly don't stand out too much compared to other things. The recent updates manipulate the game a lot more, and it's cool to see how they take advantage of modern ROM hacking abilities. And to the people who made the Ben Drowned wiki, you got me with the blinking on that one page. Whatever happened to the Ben Drowned movie, and why was Clive Barker of Hellraiser fame attached to it? Guess it's a mystery now. Lost episodes, a formula we all know. Our main character catches a mysterious episode of a TV show late at night or through a mysterious VHS or DVD, only to find the contents of the episode are scary and there's blood and hyper-realistic eyes. I've talked at length about a few major entries into the genre. Dead Bart, Everything SpongeBob, the Mickey Mouse one. I've also brought up how every notable show had to have some lost episode written about it, by some Randy trying to make their mark on the creepypasta world. Looking at the creepypasta wiki, some of these are so funny. What is Richard Pryor about? The flaming poodle? I need a creepypasta rap battle between those two.
Richard Pryor versus the flaming poodle.
There's clearly a reason the genre became so popular, obviously. In the early 2010s, animators and other creatives who work on shows had more of an online presence. Behind-the-scenes content on cartoons was more available than ever. I suppose it would be believable to people that something creepy could slip through the cracks. I mean, think of that evil Rugrats comic, or all that stuff that came out from the SpongeBob crew. And the hyper-realism is most likely from those cartoon character in real-life photoshops that are pretty creepy, let's be honest. Like Ben Drowned, I want to draw comparisons to the train coming into the station. This was the first time people saw something like this written down somewhere, and not a playground rumor like Barney getting a rock dropped on his tail and cussing out the audience. These stories aren't anything special in hindsight, and that's bad because for a lot of people, mostly children, writing their own lost episode stories, these were the gold standard of quality. The genre of lost episodes never evolved in any way, and the formula got pretty stale. It's gotten so old that making fun of it is cliche, but there are some exceptions. The real classics. Candle Cove, 1999, anything that tries to make an original IP or video is interesting at least. There's at least two stories that try and tie all the various lost episodes together. One by iconic creepypasta author and drama YouTuber, I guess, Slime Beast, and another by Hopeless Night Owl. Slime Beast's chilling tale is simply titled Lost Episodes, and follows the author recounting his experiences with an old childhood friend named Sid. He has a hobby of cutting together VHS tapes to make his own edited versions of movies, usually to remove sad or scary parts, it sounds like. The author encourages him to do more with these edits, and inadvertently pushes the first domino of Sid going off the deep end and turning into a fanatic, making dark versions of movies and TV shows in his garage, including death and gore, all that. Later on, he starts putting these grim tapes in stores and leaving them around for people to find, implying this is how lost episodes got their canonical start. Years later, after a falling out, he goes back to Sid's house to find his parents have been dead for years, and Sid as this horrible zombie corpse thing with wires from the TV sticking into his body, and a weird cartoon of him playing on the TV. It has that ambiguity that a lot of good pastas do, even with the explicitly gory ending. The edits that Sid makes using 80s technology are a little unbelievable, but other than that, it's a fun way to put all these stories together under one umbrella, with some additional mystery. If Sid is gone, then why do the lost episode stories keep getting reported? Why is he a weird zombie corpse thing with TV wires going into him? What happened to his parents? This story is impossible to search for, because if you search lost episodes creepypasta on Google, you get nothing but lost episode creepypastas, and not the actual story. Plus, I recall hearing Slime Beast is very protective of his work, and if that's true, it makes sense. I wasn't able to find the story on any of the major sites and had to go on his own blog. Better than creepypasta.com with all their horrendous ads. I don't want to hear any whining about ad blocker from you guys if you're gonna be worse than Fandom Wiki about it. Alternatively, Lost Episodes Can Be Found Again plays with the idea in a different way. OP recounts a terrifying experience watching the Aristocats as a young boy, with the movie containing scenes of horrible animal abuse, including the old lady getting rid of the cats by drowning them in gruesome detail. He does some classic internet sleuthing and finds out about other similar lost episodes before talking to his family member, an FBI informant, who gives OP some info about an Illuminati-esque secret society made up of people within the entertainment industry who make these lost lost episodes, and they have men in black who track them down, and they agree to let him watch the evil Aristocats cut as long as he keeps it a secret. They lost me at the secret society. And what's weirder is they're called the Lost Media Group. The story feels like it was written at the beginning of the Lost Media Wiki, because it's a hybrid between a classic Lost episode story and your average early Lost Media tale, like The Clockman. When it was written, there was probably some realism that the story had, but the scale becomes too large and unbelievable. Parts of it remind me of 1999, where the author sits down to interview people and watch these mysterious tapes. But here, OP is traveling around the country and being hunted down in the process. It's not scary, and there's no real suspense either. It's stupid, that's what it is. Also, he writes it like in the Aristocats, it's the old lady who tries to get rid of the cats. It's the butler who does it in the movie. I haven't even seen it, and I know that. Fake fan. I always think it's funny when shows acknowledge creepypastas based on them. Gumball did a The Grieving thing, and if I remember correctly, The Simpsons had an intro based on Dead Bart. And you can't forget the scary Squidward being in an actual episode of SpongeBob. Can't believe Learning with Pibby got cancelled. I'm sure you know what that was. It was like this creepypasta but real, and this Dora the Explorer type character has to fight all these hyper-realistic bloody eye characters. Oh, we were robbed. Not the show though, probably would have been bad. I'm talking about her. 1999 is a story I revisit at least once a year. I think it's pretty great. The pasta takes the form of a blog post written by our main character, Elliot. He recalls a weird channel he got on the ancient TV in his room and the unsettling shows that would air. Clearly all made by one guy, programming consisted of a no-budget children's show called Mr. Bear's Cellar, weird ramblings about how humanity needs to be wiped out, and other stuff depending on the version of it you read. Elliot follows Mr. Bear's instructions and writes a letter to him so he can come and visit. But when the time comes to see Mr. Bear, he's greeted with a crime scene. Years later, he finds out the gruesome truth of the channel, including what Mr. Bear really did to all those kids in his cellar. Last episode, I lumped it together with Candle Cove as a Lost episode story that holds up today. The story isn't like most stereotypical Lost episodes. Most of the writing is about the main character's experience with the media in question and hunting it down rather than describing what said media contains. Of course, that still is a part of it. It's a pretty long story too, so it's great to put on a reading while you work or something. Let's look up some of the classic 1999 readings. Oh, a lot of them are gone. I wonder what that's about. Before going into this, I was aware of some of the additions made to 1999 by other people, but I wasn't aware of the whole controversy surrounding it all. Sometime after the story got popular, the original author claimed that 1999 was stolen and put on the wiki by some other guy with a bunch of stuff he didn't write attached to it. So if anyone remembers a whole part with Booby, not Ubi, Booby, the hand show with the stabbing, or additional episodes of the Paint with the Soul show, all that stuff comes from the Creepypasta wiki version, the stolen version. Explains why a lot of original readings for the story are off YouTube. That was the stolen version, and the author wanted to set everything straight. But then we have people come out of the woodwork to say that the original person is lying, and he wrote all that extra stuff, and removing it is him covering for the fact that he plagiarized one of the parts from a YouTube show. I don't know what to think anymore. Here's a pretty good video that gets into the minutia of it. I'm gonna base my thoughts on the current version that's up today, with all the extra fluff removed. If you haven't experienced 1999 in any real way, I'd encourage you to. It deals with, yes, a particularly disturbing subject, but it's treated the way it should be. It's not overly melodramatic either. I do, however, think the satanic twist is stupid. It's one of those tropes that instantly is meant to make something scarier, but does the opposite. It feels juvenile. This is what a kid would think a cool, dark, mature twist would be. If Mr. Bear had some unique motive without any explicit religious affiliation, it would have been more interesting. I was very shocked while researching to find that there was a 1999 TV series on Amazon, but as of right now, all the episodes are unavailable, both on there and on YouTube. Maybe I'll update the script if I'm able to watch and give my thoughts, but I don't know. After emailing the creator, I was sent a mysterious download link to the series. I opened up the zip file to see the videos, and to my surprise, it's a student film. It was an early student film, so I won't harp on it too much, but it's a very literal adaptation, and I don't think that works for a story like 1999. A lot of it consists of Elliot sitting around and shots of him holding papers. I wish they could have opened it with a flashback like the original does. It's clear the director was working with the budget and skill set that they had at the time. I'm sure they're a lot better at putting together a narrative and directing actors now. The old guy he interviews is trying his best to make it work. Good for him. Ahoy there, mateys, let me tell ye a spooky tale to rattle your bones. Candle Cove is a great story. It's so simple but effective. Users on a forum talk about an eerie kid show they saw in the 70s, with more and more grim details revealed through their conversation. Eventually it culminates in a twist where we're left to wonder if the show had some supernatural origin. It's a great ending. A lot of famous urban legends and campfire stories have that kind of twist. Not talking about it this year, but the one with the babysitter and the clown statue comes to mind. The only flaw I can see is that the skin taker is too on the nose to be something casually brushed off. Yes, it was the 70s, but no small children's puppet show would have a character like that. Parroting talking points from Jenny Nicholson again, I see. Yeah, just wait for my 4-hour Star Wars hotel video. With any creepypasta that's good, people feel the need to expand on it and make their own versions that nearly all miss the point of the original. Last year I talked about Channel Zero, a TV series that used Candle Cove as a jumping off point for their own larger mystery. Before that, a whole bunch of stories came out that pretty much tried to do the same thing, but bad. All by different authors with no real continuity, but they're all listed on the Creepypasta wiki and or have readings available on YouTube, so I figured we'd take a little detour on our high seas adventure to talk about the forgotten lore of Candle Cove. Two stories in particular gave us the baseline for the Candle Cove extended universe.
Memoirs of a Set Designer by unknown author.
And Candle Cove Experiences, Tales of the Laughingstock by Ishmael Dugan. At a glance, it points to the latter being the first, but for various reasons we'll get into, I think that's highly unlikely. Both center around the cast and crew of the Candle Cove show, rather than recounting it from a child's perspective. The show was the brainchild of one Emerson Grimes, a man with the most evil-sounding name ever. According to both, Grimes was mentally disturbed and demanded all types of scary things be in the show, including the famous screaming episode. Attaching a cast and crew to the show instantly makes it less scary and raises all kinds of questions, and not the good kind, like, oh, what was that all about? More like, why would anybody be involved in something like this and not intervene? Or how did nobody realize that the show is only able to be seen by children? Memoirs of a Set Designer is done well for what it is. Anonymous set designer recounts her experience on board the show. Descriptions of certain things are realistic, like this is someone who actually worked in showbiz. The other one, with the long name I won't bother to say, let's get into it. I was shocked how low quality it was, and how it's still up on creepypasta.com. It's one of the worst stories I've read so far, and is borderline incomprehensible. There's a lot of phrasing that doesn't make sense, really weird spelling errors. The author wrote trudged up, like dredged up. That's gonna be a part of my vocabulary for years to come. If you look at the storytelling, a lot of it doesn't make sense either, or is really unintentionally funny. Gonna encourage you to read it blind and come back to see what I mean. If you want spoilers, it's structured like 1999, kind of. You can tell the author really wants to do 1999. He goes around to all these different people and all of them are like, how dare you bring back these horrible memories? And some of them have mental breakdowns over it every time. This happens like thrice. The author is like, yeah, I'm sorry about that. He sets out to interview Janice, who is the little girl on the show, and he starts by writing their conversation in quotes like, okay, this is the interview. But no, that's him asking for the interview. Why did that need to be in quote? The author censors his own name out of anonymity, but for some reason doesn't have the courtesy to do that with any of the crew members he gets in contact with. Please read it yourself. I'm sacrificing my YouTube watch time by not recapping every single strange decision the author makes. I think we would be here all day if that were the case. The names of the cast and crew are the same between these two stories, leading me to think that one incorporated them from the other. For some reason, Laughingstock pulls in a bunch of random character names that I've never heard before. Nathan is a character that was proposed for Candle Cove in Memoirs, but is mentioned with no context in this. Melrose also gets brought up. She has a page on the Candle Cove fandom wiki, which we'll get into, but I have no idea where she comes from. Hudo Hoodlum's Revenge went for years covering awful creepypastas, but never once managed to find this one for whatever reason. It would have fit right in one of his top 10s. Emerson Grimes is mentioned again in a shorter story titled The Journal of Damian Green. Like Tales from the Laughingstock, it follows someone tracking down some Candle Cove info, 1999 style. This one I could only find on the Spin Pasta wiki, which is a testament to its quality. For context, the Spin Pasta wiki is mainly populated by stuff like Dark Bubble Guppies kills THX logo 666 2004 variant.exe, and anything within that sphere. It is somehow both less and more embarrassing than the story being on the Troll Pasta wiki. Tier list goes creepypasta.com, Creepypasta fandom wiki, Creepypasta files wiki, Troll Pasta wiki, Spin Pasta wiki. Anyways, This story doesn't describe exactly how Damien finds the episodes of Candle Cove. It does describe the weird sexual overtones that the show has for some reason in this one. Moving on, the Grimes home still perpetuates our friends Grimesy as the Candle Cove mastermind, but the story itself isn't related to the show all that much. Our author, the brother of Emerson, comes back to his childhood home to clear it out after his mother passes away. In the basement, he finds a bunch of Candle Cove puppets and starts to see visions being haunted by some Lovecraftian entity called the Signal. It's implied that both Emerson and the mom were taken by this force, and that the Signal somehow beamed the idea for Candle Cove into Emerson's head. Interesting, but it doesn't stand out. Going into a creepy house with a scary thing in the basement isn't my type of thing. 60% of Reddit no-sleep stories follow that formula. The timeline also makes no sense, because in other stories, Emerson Grimes is said to be an old man when he was showrunning on Candle Cove, so why would his mother have just passed away in the story? I think it's the first Candle Cove spinoff we're talking about today that does the thing, where they use a line from the original and the reader is supposed to say, "Ha, I know where that's from." I think the "you have to go inside" line coming from Emerson's childhood is interesting, but I can't shake the feeling that it's the same as some stupid modern Hollywood prequel movie. The next few stories we're going to be talking about are pretty far removed, focusing on random victims of the show. Some are more interesting, while others fall into being kind of nothing. Candle Cove Day of the Dead manages to be funny and actually creepy at the same time. It's framed as a therapy session with our protagonist, so the format is pretty unique. This back and forth leads to her trudging up ancient memories of watching Candle Cove as a kid, before I assume she either has a mental break or her soul gets taken by Candle Cove. It dips into unintentional humor when the therapist starts peppering Candle Cove iconography into their dialogue. I can't describe why, but it reads like a Twitter post. The way everything starts fading into Candle Cove is pretty creepy in its own way. The only one of these stories today that's managed to actually creep me out. Lullaby Rock incorporates some kind of sci-fi angle to its twist, which goes for something close to the original. Main character comes home one day and catches Candle Cove on the TV, where a before unseen mermaid character sings a song that puts him to sleep, and he wakes up 2 years later, having been in a coma. Our twist at the end is that the main character's mom gets some kind of check from NASA, meaning either Candle Cove was some kind of experiment gone wrong, or she willingly made her kid a test subject of some kind. Makes you think. Down in the Dark follows the main character's experience finally catching Candle Cove on TV after her friends keep bringing it up. Naturally, the show scares her so bad, she runs upstairs from the basement where the TV is to get her dad to turn it off. When he goes down there, it's implied that Candle Cove did something to him. For the rest of his life, he has weird bouts of staring off into space and other weird symptoms. After he passes, the main character goes back to the house where the incident happens and hears that same Candle Cove music coming from the basement she did all those years ago. Like Grimes, it gives me the vibe of some random Reddit story with the Candle Cove skin. Not like that makes it a bad story. Thought it was alright. The leather cape has a somewhat compelling twist, but the main story isn't doing anything for me. The main character gets the object in question from a sketchy old man at a flea market, and it's played completely straight. It also has this line: "For those who were curious, I did not succeed in getting in her pants," but that's inconsequential to the story. Thanks, main character. I also discovered a new trope to dislike. The old guy who sells him the skin taker puppet is like needlessly rude to him. I said, are you gonna buy it, or are you just gonna stand there all day molesting it? Come on, kid, I gotta go on lunch. Nobody talks like that. I don't know. At least where I live, it's customary to talk someone up while they're looking to buy something from you. And if he was going to lunch, wouldn't he try and make it more of an incentive for him to buy it then? You know, be nice. This guy's a bad businessman, that's all. All these disparate tales do come together. The Candle Cove fandom wiki is a thing, and it's pretty thorough for something like this. Of course, a lot of it is generated by the public, and a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but it's not hard to see that effort. Candle Cove is begging for a modern retelling through an ARG or spooky YouTube series. Even if people don't have the resources to make puppets, 3D animation software is way more accessible than it was 15 years ago. You could totally make your own Candle Cove now, and you don't have to follow the original. Through reading all I could from the Grimes verse, I think it would be cool to do a reimagining where Candle Cove in-universe was a larger production, maybe like all those actual puppet or live-action mascot shows from the time, where it was well-liked in the 70s, but people now don't really care about it, and you could have commentary on the entertainment industry. If it was an actual production and not psychically beamed into kids' heads, why would any parent put their child on a show where there's skin-stealing skeletons and an episode of only crying and screaming, unless they're a horrible showbiz parent? And you can have Emerson Grimes be some nasty producer who gets out of hand, and maybe there's sinister supernatural things that go on. People can steal that idea if they want. Candle Cove, Dan Schneider edition. The Rake is one of the oldest creepypasta characters to exist, first being thought up on 4chan in the mid-2000s. The story we know now details a woman's search for information about the creature after her family gets... oh, you know. The Rake has all the mystery of the OG Slenderman, crossed with an actual scary design. I hate the idea of this randomly appearing at the foot of my bed at night. The story is a short read, but a fun one. Again, it's that ambiguity. I love when they show all the different historical accounts, and one of them was just like, we saw the Rake, with no context. It's so good. The accompanying Rake images are also pretty freaky. This one even got posted on the news, people saying it was real. I don't like this one, though. I feel like I'm gonna have to have an awkward conversation with the Rake about our relationship. Draw your baby girl like this. The Rake is relatively obscure compared to most pasta monsters, but did get 2 movies based on it. One, The Rake-ing, that came out in 2017, and The Rake in 2018. The Rake-ing looks so bad it isn't worth it. The Rake 2018, however, I did watch, and honestly, I think I would have preferred The Rake-ing. The Rake in the Rake movie only shows up for a combined maybe 5 minutes. The rest is this kind of psychological drama about these 2 kids whose parents got and this lady moving into a new house. And I tried to get invested. I like to think I was. The conflict between the husband character and the disheveled blonde lady was interesting, how he wanted to start fresh, and as a result was kinda unsympathetic to his sister-in-law's mental health struggle. It could have led to some good internal conflict if they didn't decide to turn him into an abusive cartoon supervillain by the end. The other characters besides the husband, wife, and sister really don't do much. As soon as the Rake actually begins raking people, it's clear that this whole moving into a new house plot is here to fill time and provide enough victims for the titular monster. If you couldn't tell, this Tubi movie was very shoddily put together. There were bits of the soundtrack I enjoyed, only to find that it was all taken from random music libraries. I get the impression that they only had the Rake costume for like a day, that the writer banged out whatever they could fill a movie, so resorted to the whole family plot without basing it on anything from the original Rake myth. The Rake doesn't act like the Rake, he looks like a stupid rubber alien thing. The iconic imagery of the Rake at the foot of the bed isn't there. In the universe of the film, the Rake is this parasitic entity that attaches itself to people and makes them into killers. That way they can have blood and gore in the opening without having to show the Spirit Halloween Rake costume. The Rake movie is a cheap cash grab, no doubt. My heart goes out to the cast and crew who probably had to work with a tight budget and schedule. The Rake is a character that could work in a film, or a short miniseries, if you played up that mystery angle. This movie doesn't. In the final 15 minutes, it turns into Halloween Friday the 13th, characters bumbling around and getting got by the Rake. The kills themselves aren't even creative or special. You set up this wine cellar and these broken bottles and you're not going to do anything with them? The movie is missing an ending. I'm not kidding. It's only 80 minutes and nothing is resolved. Even a short epilogue after the scene they filmed where the brother character turns into the Rake could have worked, but I guess not. It just ends. That's it. It just ends. I originally went into Mr. Widemouth wondering why the character didn't end up being as popular as other monsters like Jeff the Killer, Slenderman, etc. My theory is that he can't be drawn as an edgy anime boy. However, I think the real reason is the story itself. Mr. Widemouth follows an unnamed protagonist, relaying a story from his early childhood, during a time when his parents would move around a lot. Right when they're ready to pack up and leave an old house in Maine, main character kid meets Mr. Widemouth. Mr. Widemouth is described as a weird gizmo, Furby-looking thing. He's all happy and cheerful and stuff and wants to play games with our main character, but all of them involve dangerous activities. He says that if kid jumps out the window, there'll be an imaginary trampoline at the bottom, and that juggling with knives is completely safe. Main character refuses all of this because it's too dangerous, put a pin in that, and later moves away from the house. There is a twist at the end where Mr. Widemouth tells the kid about a secret place he wants to take him, and then he comes back as an adult and it's a graveyard! I didn't come out of it scared or even intrigued or anything. The idea of this imaginary friend trying to do away with the kid is interesting, but it's not executed well. If the kid doesn't fall for any of it, where's the danger? Where's the suspense? He doesn't get hurt at all throughout the story, and we know he's alive to tell the tale, so we already know he got out okay. Juggling knives is also really lame. No kid is gonna do that. This entity or whatever, he sucks at killing people. We set up earlier on that the kid's parents move around a lot, so why not have some kind of peer pressure thing going on, where he wants a friend so badly he's willing to engage in dangerous dangerous activities with whatever this is. That angle is never brought up, but it seems pretty obvious, and something that would maybe be uncomfortable, have a power dynamic with our main antagonist. In the story, Mr. Widemouth has no spine. He gives up after the kid says no to all his games. There's a part where the author describes him as waving goodbye sadly as he sees the kid and his family drive away. Come on. I do like that we're left to infer a lot about the house, it being the only one on the market at the time of the family moving in, and getting burnt down shortly after they move out. They don't draw too much attention to the former. I think the author wanted to go for something more subtle in the story, rather than having the imaginary friend character brutalize the entire family. That might have been a good way to go about it, but the story doesn't have any suspense or danger to it, so it feels like they're pulling a lot of punches. This reads like the treatment for a Goosebumps book. Like, imagine if in It, Georgie went up to Pennywise and he was like, "You're scary!" and then he left. That's what Mr. Widemouth is. Mr. Widemouth doesn't have any notable adaptations or supplemental media, but I did manage to track down the origin of the famous drawing of the character. It's by Rooms in the Walls on DeviantArt. Go give it a favorite. Probably would be good to support the artist since this got stolen and put everywhere. It's cool that the description of Mr. Widemouth is so vague that you can really draw him in any way you want. Some people give him a beak, others make him a weird little teddy bear thing. It's neat. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go practice my juggling. I just don't have that much of an attachment to Pokemon. I played some of the games as a kid, watched the show when it was on Cartoon Network. Some designs I like. Pokemon Go as a game is fun. You know, I don't hate it, but I'm not able to get into Pokemon as much as some other people can. I was ready to roll my eyes at all these famous Pokemon creepypastas as a result, but they actually surprised me with how tasteful they were. Yeah, tasteful. That's the word I'm gonna use. A lot of them are like articles you'd find on the cutting room floor, and for 2011, that's a pretty good way to get across a believable story about a creepy hidden thing in a game. Or an eerie song. Lavender Town Syndrome is an urban legend based on the original version of the Lavender Town song from Pokemon Red and Green in Japan. Kids who listened to the song were said to have taken their own lives, or experienced other negative side effects, like anxiety and depression. This is because of tones that only children are able to hear. Once an online user put the song through a spectrogram, they found some eerie images. Clearly none of it is real, but the matter-of-fact way it's written gives it a shred of believability. There were ways to disprove it, but most people were too lazy to track down Japanese newspapers to see if this was even slightly true. It also does have some basis in reality, not the song or the spectrogram or any of that. I'm sure we all know about the Porygon episode of the original Pokemon anime, the seizure-inducing lights. Even in the West, people knew about it. It was on The Simpsons, dude. It's similar enough to what's described in the pasta for people to be like, oh, I remember that. Buried Alive is very similar. Like the previous, it's not really a story, more written like a Did You Know Gaming video. So this guy was originally going to be a boss in Pokemon Red and Green, and would have had really weird dialogue about wanting to eat the player and stuff. If the player lost to this Buried Alive character, not only would there be a sprite of the main character getting eaten by it, but it would download the Buried Alive image onto the Game Boy's internal memory and display it on the startup. So no matter what game you played, you'd see this upon booting up your Game Boy. Even though the sprite of the player being eaten by Buried Alive is something Nintendo would never put in the game, there's nothing supernatural. Buried Alive doesn't come out of the screen and kill the player IRL or anything. You aren't gonna have to suspend your disbelief too much, even less than Lavender Town. Misfortune.gb, while not specifically a Pokemon creepypasta, is close enough to one, the evil game in question being found in certain copies of Pokemon Red, among other Game Boy games. It has a similar effect on people to Lavender Town. The author even claims that the Lavender Town myth was based on this game. That's cool. It's that matter-of-fact tone that sells the whole thing, and not from the perspective of a player who buys it at a garage sale and then is driven mad by the contents, until the ending where the author writes about his friend who played the game and, you know, things happen, which I like to think was added by someone on the wiki because it clashes with the rest of it. I'd have no trouble believing it wasn't part of the original. Pokemon Creepy Black keeps with the theme of having barely any supernatural content, but follows the cliche formula of the main character getting a mysterious bootleg Pokemon cartridge. Alongside the 3 starter Pokemon, he gets a Pokemon called Ghost that can curse people, basically killing them. This even affects trainers who disappear from the game map. After using this ghost Pokemon to cheese the game, there's an extra bit added to the ROM hack where the player character, now an old man, is cursed by Ghost, and it shows a slideshow of all the Pokemon and people he killed. It's interesting. Again, this is still all in the game. The actual author character is fine after. It's very likely that this Creepy Black game is a ROM hack in the universe of the story. The author flat out says it, and doesn't imply there's a ghost in the game or whatever. horror, but the game itself is creepy enough. The scares are meant to come from the existential dread, not blood and gore in a pixelated children's game. Unlike Pokemon Lost Silver. Nuh-uh. It's not the worst story I've ever read, but it is so boring. Falls into the trap of not being good, but not bad enough to have anything to talk about. I presume it came out early in the haunted game scene, so I could forgive it for being generic, but I won't. All the author does is describe the game in detail, and all that happens is there's death and mutilation and creepy messages in his alphabets. I mean unknown. If the author liked Pokemon and wanted to write a gold and silver pasta for the hell of it, then that's great for them, but I don't get anything out of it. I am in no way ranking these with the way I choose to talk about them, but Lost Silver deserves to be last, because it's not worth your time unless you're nostalgic for it. Hypno's Lullaby I looked up and I found out it was a cringy edgelord poem song thing and not a story, so I clicked off. I guess that one's the worst. Get out of here, you. Pokemon pastas, most of them I guess, aren't really stories. They're more urban legends, which I think are just as cool. A running theme is that I like when things are mysterious. I'm not the biggest Buried Alive fan now, but I'm gonna walk away with a little more appreciation for these than I previously had. Back in mid-2010, a myth began circulating on the Minecraft forums about a mysterious entity encountered by several players. Originally a pair of white eyes, the legend evolved to a version of the default Steve skin with the iconic whitened out peepers. If you notice weird things in your Minecraft world, tunnels you didn't dig, blocks you didn't place, you might just need to be careful. Out of the corner of your eye, you might be able to see him. I never thought Herobrine was scary. He was always that thing they put at the end of the Minecraft patch notes. The classic Herobrine copypasta we all know is stupid. We obviously know that Notch never had a dead brother, and that brother didn't have his soul trapped inside Minecraft or whatever. I more appreciate Herobrine as a kind of mascot for the Minecraft community, in the way that Slenderman was synonymous with internet culture. Herobrine's kinda like that. Some scary guy who's in the corner, but also you can put him in your memes if you want. And they did. Oh, they did. As well as tons of Herobrine mods, animations, and the classic Minecraft trolling videos. Those poor kids, nobody believed in it harder and was more of a victim than the 12-year-olds in Minecraft trolling videos, and I don't blame them. Minecraft can be scary. At the time, it was the only first-person game I played. Something about being right up there in the action in a big world with all these scary creatures, it felt eerie, and there was a sense of danger. And a lot of the mechanics, if you remember, were pretty cryptic looking back. The nether portal, a lot of the crafting recipes. I played on an older version of Minecraft recently, and remembered I had to look up each individual crafting recipe online. What a time. So it's not a stretch to believe that putting some gold, redstone torches, and netherrack would summon a godlike evil entity into your game. I mean, what's the wither? I fall in and out of love with Minecraft every few years, and on my most recent playthrough, I realized how much your imagination helps enhance the experience. Thinking about all the projects you're gonna build, making up your own little stories about the mobs that live in your world. Totally lost now, and that's not the game's fault. We've all grown up. And here's another unrelated thing I want to throw in there. If your job or schoolwork involves projects and workflow and sitting at a computer for hours at a time making something, then Minecraft loses all its appeal. It's like a chore. Building a sweet Minecraft gamer castle is a chore now. That's what being an adult is like. I don't want to say there's no room for something like Herobrine in modern gaming. If he came out today, there'd probably be a bunch of cool fan art and stuff, but this specific instance is way behind us. Oh wait, what's that in the corner? Sorry guys, I've been tweaking off some of that good, if you know what I mean. I think I'm gonna go crazy and tear my arms off soon, so look out. Anyways, the Russian sleep experiment is a classic, if that hasn't been said already. It's a great example of a believable online urban legend. The story goes that around the time of World War II, the Soviets attempted to create a gas that would eliminate the need for sleep. They took some prisoners and put them in a chamber with the stuff, only to find out the gas did horrible things to them. They started getting paranoid and eventually lost their minds, getting addicted to the stuff and turning into these wild, out-of-control, super strong zombies. The rest of the tale describes the bizarre state the men are in, and ends with one of them giving this creepy speech about how they're the real manifestation of the human subconscious, or whatever. The events in the story are written in this very procedural way that could make a lot of people believe it's real. mostly children. I think it's a great science fiction concept to explore, but I don't really get much from the story itself. There's not any interesting twist, and if you don't believe it's real, then there's nothing to keep you interested. Sleep deprivation obviously doesn't turn people into crazy zombies that tear other people apart, and to make dramatic speeches about the nature of humanity. Back in high school psych class, they made us watch this video about a guy called Peter Tripp, this radio personality who in 1959 tried to stay awake as long as he could. After some time, he started hallucinating scary stuff and suffered psychological effects for a while after. That was only after 8 days. I was told that was the world record, but it was actually a college student in 1964, a few years after, with 11 days. US education system lying again. From what I read about the case, the more the guy stayed awake, the more irritable he got, and it just got worse. But mind you, both prior experiences are without the help of a mysterious laughing gas. The story's author has never come forward, explaining why there hasn't been any real big Hollywood adaptation. It's the kind of story that's due for it, such a simple premise that you could easily turn into a great film or miniseries. There have been Russian sleep experiment movies out there, but they're either a low-budget schlock or YouTube fan films. The Soviet sleep experiment was the first in 2019. I couldn't find this for free anywhere, and I decided it wasn't worth my time or money. The other adaptation, The Sleep Experiment, was on Tubi, so thankfully I was able to give it a look. Sleep Experiment isn't awful, but there's not much to it aside from the novelty of it being a creepypasta movie. It takes a lot of liberties with the story. For one, it's set in the UK in the 1960s, and nowhere in this is it implied that the gas is the thing making people into killers. Spoilers for this movie, I guess. One of the central characters is this doctor who I swear was doing a German accent in the beginning, but he goes back to his normal British voice and never brings it up. The movie will cut back to him being interviewed by these two detectives about the experiment and how it killed all those people. It's clear that he's evil, and the movie acts like it's a twist. In place of the test subject speech, he has his own speech that goes like, yes, I was the one who deprived you of sleep because I like to see people die, because I am a psychopath and I'm addicted to killing people. It's stupid. You see it coming from a mile away. It's not a twist or a big reveal, and they frame it like he's giving his backstory like that matters at all. I don't need to know this character's troubled childhood. The guy who looks like Tim Curry doing a fake German accent and locks prisoners in a room with no sleep has a few screws loose. Wow, that's your payoff to 90 minutes of build-up. I'm disappointed on that end because I liked what they try to do with the other prisoners. Give them all unique personalities, so it's interesting when we see their descent into madness. I would have liked it more if the pacing were a bit slower, and I wouldn't disagree if people complain their personalities were too cartoonish. They're all very distinct, both in personality and looks. I gotta applaud the casting director, because all of these people stand out so much when you put them in a room together. Hair and makeup also plays a part. I doubt this guy has that evil handlebar mustache IRL. Half the actors in this movie are dead ringers for other people too, it's so funny. I said it before, we have Tim Curry, but then Chris Pratt, Eric Idle, Thom Yorke, and kinda Tom Green combined, and then Ryan Gosling mixed with the black-haired kid who was on the boat in Dunkirk. Set design was also something worth pointing out. I like what they did with the test chamber and the area where all the scientists looked in, plus the evil doctor's house with all the taxidermied animals. It's a nice little environmental touch. I think they tried to do something like Channel Zero, have a loose adaptation of the creepypasta that tells its own story, but a lot of parts came off pretty sloppy. It's not worth going out of your way to watch, but it is free, so it's not too much of a waste. I've already spoiled the best part for you, is that it takes place in the UK. Cancel me all you want, accents are funny. The mustache guy's evil posh voice versus the guy who was so Irish I couldn't understand him was amazing. And as soon as the doctor started doing the fake German thing, I was cracking up. It's like I was on some scary evil Soviet laughing gas or something. This is a very special week, my friends. This week we'll be talking about all the edgy anime boy OCs. This is a genre of creepypasta that I assume came after the wake of epic Jeff the Killer fan art. People wanting to make their own cool serial killers for people to draw fan art of and ship together. Laughing Jack is the first example I went with because A, it was the first I could think of, and B, his design is the only interesting thing about him, because that's all you're supposed to care about. The story is just like Mr. Widemouth. Both use the evil imaginary friend trope, but neither of them leave that much of an impression. Laughing Jack follows an unnamed single mother, or father depending on which narration you're listening to, whose son starts talking about an imaginary friend named Laughing Jack. After mom has a nightmare, spooky things start happening around the house, escalating to Laughing Jack gutting their dog, and then the kid. The whole thing feels really bland. The characters of the boy and the mom aren't given any memorable personality traits, and aside from the candy that Jack puts in the dog, there's nothing all too creative about him. He just shows up and does what he does. He's a clown, why not not have him do something clowny? Beyond the whole candy thing, of course. The mom is obviously distressed by all the things going on, but it's not communicated in any interesting way. That part should have been fleshed out more, at least. It does its job as a short horror story, but Laughing Jack has no intrigue. I had more issues with it originally, but those actually came from the Mr. Creepypasta reading of it. Going through these stories on my own instead of a narration 9 times out of 10 makes them better. The origin of Laughing Jack was published sometime around the first, and is much longer. Most of the added length is because of all the in-depth gore scenes, however. Laughing Jack first gets brought into the world in the 1800s. A lonely little boy in London has no friends to play with, so a guardian angel, the story never clarifies, delivers him a magical Jack-in-the-Box for Christmas. Jack comes out of the box and is the boy's new magical friend for life. Instead of the Laughing Jack we know now, he's bright, colorful, and doesn't kill people. The boy gets an escape from his abusive parents by playing with the clown, but after Laughing Jack strangles a cat to death on accident, the boy is blamed for it and sent away. Years later, the boy comes back to the house where Jack's old box is, and he's a serial killer. Laughing Jack is corrupted by not only the loneliness brought on by missing his boy, but since his personality is magically linked to his, Jack becomes a killer too. The whole last third of the story is just made up of long drawn-out gore scenes. Jack's kid, and now an adult, brings home victims to murder, and they go through that like 5 times. And then Jack kills the boy, which is kind of fun because he says Freddy Krueger quips while he does it, and makes balloon animals out of the dude's intestines. I think the idea of the magic clown getting corrupted, that's cool, but the rest of the story isn't memorable. In fact, neither of these are. It's the design that carries. He's so cool, even if he is another iconic creepypasta monster that looks like a Death Note character. His design stuck. You can still buy a bunch of stuff of Laughing Jack on Amazon and on random Halloween decoration websites. Maybe I'm misremembering, or wasn't there a Laughing Jack mask at Spirit Halloween last year? People who are into edgy anime boys and clowns probably like him a whole lot. Thanks to the origin story, there's 2 versions of him now, so you can do the Onceler thing and ship him with himself. The Laughing Jack duology isn't as bad as Jeff or something, but he hasn't gone down in history for being a well-written or scary character. He's a cool emo clown guy, one out of many creepypastas that only exist to platform their edgy monsters and nothing else. Tiki Toby is when these start to jump the fence from being horror stories in any sense to self-insert OC fanfiction. Toby is a young lad who's not having the best time. He and his sister just got in a car crash, which she didn't survive, compounded with his multiple disorders including Tourette syndrome and CIP. He can't feel pain. Things start spiraling out of control. Toby's having visions and starts chewing on his own skin. Eventually he snaps and, just like our friend Jeff, gets rid of his entire family before burning down his house and being taken in by a tall, white-skinned, slender man. Yes, Toby is canonically a proxy, I guess, one of Slender's henchmen. So he gets to live in a mansion and have slice-of-life adventures with all the other creepypasta characters. Toby's Tourette syndrome doesn't play into the story, nor does his inability to feel pain. The story gives Toby more of a reason than Jeff to go mad and start killing people, but at the end of the day is a very forced origin for a character with an okay design. The Slender Mansion thing is a whole different leg of the creepypasta fandom, one I wasn't exposed to as much when I was young. Very, very popular though. The stupid Rhett and Link Waffles animatic has over 1 million views. And therein lies the problem. Read the original Tiki Toby story. It was obviously written by someone very young, and when you're that young, you don't have any real idea what to do with your random DeviantArt character when it gets picked up and absorbed into this giant fandom. You lose all control of him. People start making their own accepted fanon version, far removed from your original, and then people start making money off of him. And then you have YouTubers tearing your story apart being like, yep, this is bad. Relatively recently, Tiki Toby's creator has put out a few statements about how they want him removed from the creepypasta fandom. Some people will listen, some won't, but I think they do have the right to tell people to stop. From what I've read, the whole situation has caused them a lot of pain. Me personally, I've been in enough pain having to sit through the Slender Mansion comic dubs. I'd be glad if he disappeared from the face of the earth. That whole phenomenon is so funny to me because in many cases they ignore the original stories entirely. Ben Drowned is a character who's usually this Link with bloody eyes, with no connection to the original 4chan thing, and then they have Hoodie and Masky from Marble Hornets, but they're proxies. They're trying to stop Slenderman in the series, dude. I think all the creepypasta characters being friends is fun, but that only works if they were popular and or scary in any way. Yeah, get Toby out of there. Anyways, Tiki Toby is a grim reminder of what happens to people who make stuff online. It's great to have your work get attention, but it sucks having it go too far. Eyeless Jack is a very dull story. The title character looks cool, but what else does he do? What is special about him compared to Jeff or Laughing Jack? He eats kidneys, I suppose. Eyeless Jack is a classic instance where the image came first, followed by the story. The original was made by Twitter user Pirate Cashew and uploaded to 4chan in 2010, where it was adopted in 2012 and made into its own story. The Eyeless Jack picture is great. The colors and blur effect feel like I'm there, waking up in the middle of the night and seeing whatever this is. The story follows our main character Mitch, who moves in with his brother Edwin. Okay, what are these names? He sees this thing above him when he sleeps and starts getting random injuries at night. He goes to the hospital and finds out that his kidney was removed. Even worse, this mysterious blue guy got Edwin. Not Edwin. Mitch goes back to the house and finds Edwin's body, laying beside it, his kidney, half-eaten. Jack's design is what catapulted him into creepypasta stardom, along with a few origin stories. I've watched a few Slender Mansion comic dubs and animations trying to figure out what the fanon Eyeless Jack is, but I can't glean too much. Both Eyeless Jack origin stories have some kind of cult in them. I'm not sure if either of them explain the kidney thing. I assume that's what he eats because he's some kind of demon thing. If I'm not mistaken, the tentacles you see coming out of his mouth in a lot of fan art are something that came about randomly. I really don't like when they have him with the mask off. It always looks ugly to me. Put that thing back on, son. Not much to say about Eyeless Jack. Cool image, subpar story. Immensely popular. We've seen it all before. Clockwork, Your Time Is Up is just sad. It's another Tiki Toby situation where the author wants nothing to do with the creepypasta community anymore. Worse in the case of this story and the subject matter it deals in. You wouldn't be wrong to call the main character Natalie a self-insert, who turns into a cool serial killer and gets revenge on her abusive family. But if you have additional context, the story reflects a pretty dark place the author was in. They were 12, 13 when they wrote this. And to have it trudged up, brought it back, years later with fan art and all that, can't be good. If you were around back in the day, you know that the story was the punching bag of any YouTuber who covered bad creepypastas. Pot calling the kettle black here, I know. But at least when I cover anything similar, I try and approach it fairly, acknowledge the creator's age or when the thing came out. People in 2013, however, were brutal. Yeah, sorry, but I'm not going into the story. All I'm gonna do is read this amazing fandom comment. I don't want to be rude, but I don't know what was the propose for soft boys to writing such that garbage, but what I want to say, my message to soft boys, if I were you, I would have made a better job than you. So if you come up with creepypasta idea, retake those English classes, just like us, before you write any next letter, if you do have a talent for your writing. Who agree? This was written this year. Okay, after our week of funny OC characters, I think I'm gonna need to cut off all my senses so that I can see God. Gateway of the Mind is a short and sweet affair. The pasta details an experiment wherein a man had his nervous system completely shut down. It's hypothesized that with no connections to the mortal world, he'll be able to make contact with God. Oh, he sees God all right, but he doesn't have good news. To quote the story, I've spoken with God, and he has abandoned us. Even before that, he gets contacted by the dead family members of the researchers and hundreds of other lost souls. All in all, the scientists were proved right, but the results were more horrific than expected. Compare it to the Russian sleep experiment, but I think Gateway came off as more realistic. Instead of a whole bunch of test subjects turning into zombies and tearing people apart, it goes for something relatively more subtle. The cosmic horror angle of all these beings speaking through the old man can be really horrific if you give it enough thought. The short length helps make it even more credible. I used the term matter of fact when I brought up those Pokemon creepypastas, and it applies here. The author is a very good liar. Even though the nervous system is a lot more complex than the story would have you believe, it would probably be really hard to do, if not impossible, to cut off the senses in the way the story describes. Sensory deprivation is a thing, not severing all your nerves, but you've seen in movies and on TV people floating in those big pods with salt water. The worst I've read about it in my research for this video is that maybe you can be a little uncomfortable or have minor hallucinations. No chance of talking to the dead. Sensory tanks can actually have a lot of positive effects, kinda like meditation. Mind you, it also seems like any Joe Schmo can just buy a few of these and put them in a strip mall and charge people hundreds of dollars per session. Most pro-sensory tank rhetoric you're gonna find is from these people. Maybe they're trying to shill their own business, or maybe once you sign up for an hour in the pod, they sever all your nerves and then you get to hear the screams of the damned. You never know. The video associated with Gateway of the Mind isn't even related to the story at all. It's a random performance art piece by a guy named Oliver de Sagazan, I think. The piece is called Transfiguration, and in it he slaps a bunch of mud and clay and other stuff on him, and turns himself into all these weird creatures. There's a lot you can get out of it if you look for meaning, but I like to think it's either about how we all have to put on different faces around different people and settings, or you can look at it in a different way and say it's about how humans have this innate desire to be or act like other people, and this is some kind of representation of that in the most primal animalistic way. Play the part where he farts. A few years ago, there was a one-off analog horror based on the story. While I think it's too abridged and some of the font choices aren't accurate for the era the story takes place, it's a really cool way to adapt it. Show what the man in the story is seeing and hearing directly. Gateway of the Mind is another story that was begging for a Channel Zero season. Overall, a nice spooky little story. Mariana Mordegard Glesgorv is a very typical internet urban legend, a very short pasta too. In fact, I think I can just narrate the whole thing for you guys right now. There is a video on YouTube called Mariana Mordegard Glesgorv. If you search this, you will find a video of a man staring intently at you, expressionless, then grinning for the last 2 seconds. The background is undefined. This is only part of the actual video. The full video lasts 2 minutes and was removed by YouTube after 153 people who viewed it gouged out their eyes and mailed them to YouTube's main office in San Bruno. Said people had also committed in various ways. It is not yet known how they managed to mail their eyes after gouging them out. The cryptic inscription they each carved into their forearms has not yet been deciphered either. YouTube will periodically put up the first 20 seconds of the video to quell suspicions, so that people will not go looking for the real thing and upload it. The video itself was only viewed by one actual YouTube staff member, who began screaming 45 seconds in. The man is now under constant sedation, apparently unable to recall what he saw. Other people who were in the same room as him at the time, who eventually turned off the video, say that all they heard of it was a high-pitched drilling sound. None of them dared look at the screen. The person who uploaded the video was never found, the IP address being non-existent. The man in the video has never been identified. Okay, the story instantly becomes not scary after they mention the eye gouging. Maybe a 5-year-old would believe that, but anyone with access to Google and a brain would be able to look it up and see it's not real. The video itself is pretty creepy. The red, the eye contact, the little jump scare at the end, and the claim that YouTube puts this up just to deter people from finding the real one is neat. A lot of creepypastas have that little explanation as to why nobody can truly find the scary thing, but it might be out there. People have known for a while that the picture of the man in the video is actually some guy named Byron Cortez. I've never heard anything about him acknowledging this, although there is a chance he's probably gotten 1,000 emails and phone calls about it. Most info I was able to find on the story comes from Know Your Meme. From what I read on there, it seems that the tale has no one origin. Just kind of sprung up. Maybe it really is cursed. It's a bare bones pasta, not any modern adaptations, although there is a remake of the original from a few years ago in black and white. Lame, and a song that borrows the story's name. In order to not get beheaded by internet music people, I won't try and guess what genre it is, but it sounds very internet, which is fitting. There's an old urban legend about a mysterious YouTube channel said to contain disturbing imagery beyond your wildest imagination. Just go to youtube.com/666 and refresh the page. You'll find the YouTube interface twisted into a mangled collage of flesh, videos of bloody viscera, and the worst part is, you can't leave the page. No matter what you do, username 666 will overtake your computer. Username 666 is a really fun one, like an internet Bloody Mary. Go there and refresh and see what happens, which is always nothing because the story isn't true. But the accompanying video would have you believe so. The username 666 video was created by a Japanese artist named Piro Pito, aka Nana all these numbers. This was a remake of a similar video that used the Japanese video site Nico Nico Doga. This one was actually entered into some sort of film festival at the time. Fun fact. These are so great, the weird fleshy YouTube layout and the user clicking around to try and desperately leave the page make it memorable and realistic. The American adaptation was so popular it influenced the pasta itself. It's a situation like Jeff or Eyeless Jack. The story doesn't do much except take the perspective of a YouTube employee who gazes upon this cursed channel. Eventually his computer gets bricked, and because of it, he gets fired from his YouTube job. That, kids, is why you never look up the devil on YouTube. For a while, if you actually went to the URL, you'd find a channel that was suspended, which until a few months ago gave the story a lot of extra believability. Nowadays, you can actually see a channel called 666 that joined back in the mid-2000s. No videos, however. One playlist with other people's videos, which also seems to be taken down. The real username 666 is pretty underwhelming. A few years ago, if you removed the H from the YouTube URL you were on, or went to 666, you'd be sent to a version of the original video. This was because of an exploit in the YouTube system that allowed people to redirect the links from their channels to certain videos. If you want to experience username 666, watch the video. The story is kind of garbage compared to how well made it is. Kinda weird I'm covering this if it's only the video that's worth talking about. Maybe if this becomes an annual series and goes on for like 9 years and I run out of things to talk about, I'll have to start doing creepy videos instead of pastas. Get ready for my amazing coverage of Obey the Walrus in 2030. So trigger warning for this one, beyond the usual blood and guts talk, there is some mention of other risque or uncomfortable topics, so be warned. I don't know what to call this one. I'm not gonna do algo speak, but at the same time I don't know if it would be good to say porn over and over again in a video. So we're gonna call this one normal.com. Normal.com is a great story, probably the best out of the entire haunted internet genre. The author gets a mysterious email about the site and simply describes the content it contains. Normal.com is, quote, a website dedicated to the eradication of abnormal sexuality. Okay, you'd imagine a site like that wouldn't contain videos of people licking washing machines and getting torn apart by hungry, shaved chimpanzees. The bizarre nature of the site is what sells it. Nothing is ever explained to the reader, and every aspect of the site, or a video that's described, delves deeper and deeper into weirdness. A detail that sticks out to me is the rant on the homepage, where each word is its own hyperlink. That's so weird, but it's so real, something you'd hear about in a Parallel Pipes iceberg video. Listen, I don't want to kink shame anyone in my audience, but there is this weird feeling you get when you accidentally stumble upon someone's weird interests online. The story uses that feeling to its advantage. The author even says himself, some bizarre fetish perhaps. Keeping in mind the whole point of the website is to make people normal, and that raises even more questions. It's so icky. If I had to guess, I'd say most people interpret it like the site is run by a crazy person, but the way I always saw it is that maybe the videos do somehow correct people into being, quote, normal, but in some backwards, subconscious, Freudian way. It's eerie to think about, and so much is left up to interpretation. Sex, sexuality, porn, kinks are touchy and taboo subjects, now more than ever, I think. In that regard, normal.com feels a little bit more relevant than other scary website urban legends. It was a fun read. The author understands the English language a lot better than some others, and it never devolves into anything unbelievable. The only unbelievable thing is this video still being up because I dare not say corn instead of porn. Normal Corn for Normal People is a website made by people who are sick of Flint corn. I'm not a 90s kid, I was born in 2003. Still, Rugrats was a significant part of my childhood. I didn't watch much of the original run of episodes, you know, the good ones, but they still aired it at random on Nick, and I remember seeing the movies. We had the first one on DVD and I'd watch it over and over again. And weirdly, I did see every episode of All Grown Up. So, did the Rugrats theory destroy my childhood when I read it? Well, one, I was a child when I heard it, so no. And two, it's stupid. I think we all know that it's stupid. People have talked at length about how cartoon conspiracy theories don't amount to anything, and most of them are thrown together for clickbait shock value. The theory goes that all the other baby characters are figments of Angelica's imagination. Tommy, Chucky, Phil, and Lil all died of unfortunate circumstances, causing Angelica to make up her own playmates. What I will give this theory is that they go into a lot of the show's secondary characters, like the adults, and explain their personalities and quirks. Stu makes toys because it's his way of dealing with grief. Chaz is neurotic because of the loss of his family. Dill is supposedly the only real baby, explaining why he can't talk. The part about Angelica's mom being dead and her dad marrying a prostitute is the first step too far. They don't even use that to explain why she's on the phone all the time, when that could be a good point. The way they explain All Grown Up is that Angelica follows in her fake mom's footsteps and starts taking acid. That's why her hallucinations follow her into her teen years and are her age, except for Dill, who's younger. And his weird personality in that show is explained by Angelica hitting him on his soft spot as a baby. Okay, sure. They never explain away any of the movies, which does seem obvious, since the baby's piloting a giant mech around Paris doesn't go along with reality. Susie Carmichael is real and was the only person who played along with Angelica's delusions, which explains why she can also understand the babies. Susie, I also guess, works at Nickelodeon and is real and came up with the whole show. By knowing anything about the production of Rugrats, you know that's not true. I can't believe how many of these cartoon theories try to connect these to real life. It's also sad that the Rugrats theory is probably the best out of all of them. As needlessly dark as it is, they do make some interesting points, and get into as many details as they can. A lot of theories, especially the death or coma related ones, can't be disproven technically, but this one can. There are episodes of Rugrats where Angelica doesn't show up, and why do all the adults acknowledge the babies? Explain that one, liberals. I read multiple, quote, articles about how the creator of Rugrats debunked this, and all they link to is a 5-second video of Arlene Klasky going, "Oh yeah, it's not real." Riveting. Could have told you that myself. There's already an LS Mark video about this, so I won't go into too much detail because I don't have much to say on my own. But apparently, with a whole new generation of gullible people on the internet, these cartoon conspiracies are making a return. Mostly on stupid TikToks and YouTube shorts. I found this one with this horrible AI scary Rugrats art. This is why AI isn't going to be a threat, because it's only consistently used by people who make internet slop content like this. With the theory trend coming back, I think we need to start making up conspiracies for modern shows. Smiling Friends seems like a wacky, surreal comedy, but the show actually hides a dark secret. The Smiling Friends aren't a charity, but rather an organization of drug dealers. The reason they get calls to make celebrities and high-profile politicians smile is because those people are all doing the drugs. The reason the show is so weird is because the main character, Charlie, is always tripping. He and Pim have opposite personalities, but they still regularly hang out together. That's because Pim is a drug-induced figment of Charlie's imagination. It also explains his name. What kind of real person is named Pim? Mr. Boss is a drug lord who suffers from multiple mental illnesses and anger issues. Glep is actually his, as in Mr. Boss's, pet. Glep is regularly seen as having the short end of the stick, pushed around by the other characters, because in reality he's being neglected by everyone. It also explains why he speaks a different language than everyone else, because he's a dog, or a cat. Oh, and Alan. Oh, you don't want to know. Yeah, if you want to steal that and put it in your TikTok, be my guest. I think I cooked. You know what they say, one man's trash is another man's treasure, or another man's trauma. Barbie.avi is a creepypasta about a guy who finds an abandoned PC tower in a dumpster. Out of curiosity, ooh, that's how they get ya, he brings it home and searches through the files. Instead of finding an embarrassing snapshot of SpongeBob at the Christmas party, he finds a mysterious video titled Barbie.avi. The video is of a woman being interviewed with very distorted audio. As the interview goes on, she gets more and more visibly uncomfortable. At the end, he sees a video of train tracks near where he lives. Main character follows the tracks and finds an abandoned house. Despite this house being abandoned, the furniture is surprisingly new, and the house even has running water. Barbie.avi never quite lets you know what's going on. However, the lack of any present danger to any of the characters in the story at all makes it a little less creepy than something like normalfornormalpeople.com. The way I interpret it is that the lady in the video was taken to the house at the end and had some horrific operation done on her based on what the author finds there, but even that could be a stretch. A big theme this month, possibly inspired by Jeff the Killer, has been tracking down the original sources for these pastas' supplemental media. I didn't mention it in the Rugrats theory episode, but the original anime drawings that scared me so bad as a kid were taken off the original artist's DeviantArt. Thankfully, we know most of the story behind the Barbie.avi video. As soon as people got their hands on an upload of the video, they found out that the woman actually has one arm. One of the uploads has the letters BIID below her, leading people to believe that this was an interview of someone with BIID, or body integrity identity disorder. BIID leads people to feel like parts of their body aren't actually theirs, or don't belong. In cases, it can lead people to amputate their own limbs. Makes sense, but that wasn't the case. It was later found that the BIID thing, and the disclaimer at the beginning of the original Barbie upload, were added after the fact somehow. Through some clever searching, they were able to trace the actual video and the woman back to an online amputee fetish community. People don't really bring that part of it up, but it's true. Look it up. People also like to speculate about the word Barbie and why it's called that. Most I've heard say it's because you can customize Barbie dolls with specific reference to tearing their arms off. Okay, but that's not really a play feature. You can make them wear different clothes, but that's not a common thing to rip off a doll's arms, unless you're really mad at it. I think it's meant to be like a creepy, demeaning nickname for the lady, like, ah, come here, Barbie. Barbie.avi is a pretty tasteful story, with a mysterious attached video. Nothing quite out of the ordinary for a classic creepypasta, aside from the lack of blood or gore. It's worth revisiting if you found it boring the first time around. The Disney parks have been around for generations, with countless rumors and urban legends about the magical vacation destination. Stuff like Walt's frozen head being under the castle, ghosts haunting the different rides, and the mysterious Club 33 located somewhere in Disneyland. Plus, all the wild, real-life deaths and incidents that have taken place on Disney property. There's a fascination people have with perverting the Disney image into something dark and creepy. When, if you're lucky, the scariest thing you're gonna see at Disney is the people who wear t-shirts like this. It's become a cliche at this point to have anything with an evil Mickey Mouse, but the most popular Disney creepypastas managed to do something interesting with the idea. The Abandoned by Disney series by Slimebeast features different accounts of bizarre happenings at the parks and resorts. Slimebeast you may also know for writing other pastas like Lost Episodes, Funny Mouth, and I hate you. In spite of its reputation being boiled down to the pasta that had the photo-negative Mickey costume, Abandoned by Disney is very well written. There are a lot of great descriptions of the main character snooping around the abandoned resort, and whether intentional or not, the story aligns with so much actual Disney history. The main inspiration was an abandoned Disney cruise line resort that Slime Beast read about, and was subsequently vandalized by the locals. In the beginning, there's a lot of talk of locals not wanting Disney to build this kind of culturally insensitive resort in their city, something that actually happened in the 90s with something called Disney's America. Look up the Defunctland video on it, I remember it being pretty interesting. Disney, around the time the resort would have been built, was also trying to expand out of their two main theme parks, so there was a lot of weird little offshoot stuff like this. Michael Eisner totally would have greenlit Mowgli's Palace. With how many Disney places there are out there are of course other abandoned areas with a whole culture of urban exploring. Discovery Island and the Bay Lake at Disney World, the Wonders of Life Pavilion and Original Image Works at Epcot, and the abandoned River Country Water Park. There's a long-standing rumor that River Country closed because of some brain-eating amoeba, which influenced Abandoned by Disney, or at least gave the story a little bit more credibility. There is a pasta written about River Country, but it's not that good. It's a lost episode type story where the author finds some disturbing home movie of some guy going in the water and turning into a weird zombie, and then at the end he feels some kind of creature breathing down his neck for no reason. No reason really. The park didn't even close because of said brain-eating amoeba. That happened with one kid in the 80s, and they closed it in the 2000s. Do you think if you went inside the Star Wars Hotel today, you'd find a photo-negative Chewbacca costume running around? A few years later, Slime Beast put out a follow-up titled Room Zero. I remember watching a narration of this, but having no idea it was connected to the original. I actually think it's a lot better than the first, and actually manages to be creepy. For a creepypasta, that's a very high bar. The main character from Abandoned is back, and here's from people inside the parks about weird, almost supernatural happenings. From kids disappearing in slides at the water parks, to mysterious entities wearing Disney-themed gas masks, which are also based on a real thing, to a construction worker encountering a huge concrete structure while excavating the outer limits of Magic Kingdom. An older cast member shares her story, and this is where it dips into being pretty unsettling, describing all these people in Disney-themed gas masks shoved in this underground air raid bunker, and then weird stuff starts happening in there. She escapes the madness, but then opens the door only to hear a single voice behind her. The third story in the trilogy tries to tie everything together with the explanation that all of this is a corrupted manifestation of Disney's cultural power. People all around the world think about Disney, and all those thoughts are thus projected as these bizarre happenings and entities. Oh yeah, and the author gets hunted down by the Disney company for exposing this, as you do. Overall, the Abandoned series is really great and takes concepts that would otherwise be kinda silly and makes them interesting and a little bit disturbing. But how about we look at some more Disney pastas? Small World 1999 is a very short tale revolving around a mysterious picture taken on the classic Disneyland ride. The urban legend goes that this is an actual person hung from the ceiling, but in reality, this is one of the many doll characters that hang there and ride on zip lines or little balloons or something. I tried to find this one about working at Disney, but I found another one about It's a Small World called Working at Disney Security. It's actually really creepy, using the photo feature on the Disney World app to show this missing family stuck on the ride over and over again. The real Working at Disney is about a construction worker during the time when they were building Seven Dwarfs Mine Train. Unlike most jobs the author does for Disney, their breaks are strictly only to be taken at a certain time. While on his break, the author goes back to retrieve his lunch, thinking it won't be a big deal if he's out for a minute, only to see a human sacrifice going on somewhere inside the ride. Some girl dressed up as Snow White is being cut open by people in weird cult-ish robes. Later, it's explained that this is a tradition dating back to when the land was populated by Native Americans. In order to ensure good luck and prosperity, they had to sacrifice someone related to the structure being built. In that case, a Snow White. I think it's a little clever, but the story has a very unique problem. I've heard people complain time and time again in movies and TV when adults have to write teenagers, and it comes off as unnatural and out of touch. This story is somehow the opposite. It's someone who I assume is younger having to write a bunch of middle-aged construction workers. You can tell, and it takes me out a little. The last line is very funny. I see that Universal is hiring. I need work. Should I apply? It's so cheesy, I love it. Of course, a park with a more broad age range than Disney isn't gonna have any creepypastas about it. Trust me, I looked for something, anything, but nothing popular enough to be worth talking about. Let's end off on a pasta about my favorite Disney ride, Expedition Everest at Animal Kingdom. Spoilers for it, by the way. For a ride, yeah, You gotta go in blind. The author literally begins the story explaining why the ride is so good. They say, while being an incredibly thrilling roller coaster, it is also well themed, with the whole experience making you feel that you are truly in the Himalayas. I feel like I'm at Disney while I'm on it, but that's not denying the theming makes the ride a super fun time. A great touch is the encounter with the Yeti at the very end. I had no idea it used to be an actual animatronic, but still here I am proclaiming it as a favorite. But those in the know about the original Yeti, have you ever wondered why it doesn't move anymore? Well, the Yeti creepypasta is told from the perspective of an employee who hears some bizarre claims from guests, including that the Yeti nearly scratched some kid's face off and that it took some lady's daughter. How preposterous, our main character thinks, until he and his supervisor go up there, only to find out that it's real. Based on the layout of the ride and where/how the Yeti is positioned, I find it very hard to believe it could be real, unless there's some sort of restraint keeping it in that exact spot, like jabbed into its back. And then some guy shows up and, I kid you not, casts a magic spell on the Yeti, killing it, freezing it, and turning it into the static Yeti we know today. Well, despite the joke I made in the beginning, the Disney Parks experience is not without its flaws. The lines, prices, lack of shade in the Florida or California heat, and overall scummy practices by the Walt Disney Company in recent years. For places designed for parents to take young children, they sure are committed to making it an absolute nightmare for any family, especially the ones that don't have infinite money or time. So pardon me for saying that Disney creepypastas are redundant in that way. You go there on the wrong day and it's a horror movie. What is the best creepypasta? You might argue Candle Cove, The Russian Sleep Experiment, Borrasca, which I wasn't able to talk about this month. Most of those seem to be trumped by one story in particular. Pen Pal by David Orbach was originally posted to the No Sleep subreddit in 2011. The tale is divided up into 6 parts, making it one of the longer well-known pastas. If you haven't read it or listened to a narration, go ahead and do so. I can't tell you what to do. So let's just get into a summary. Footsteps is the first installment, following the author as a child, waking up in the middle of the woods for no reason. He's freaked out, as any kid would be, and tries to find his way back home. After some harrowing descriptions of the journey back, his mom and the police reveal this running away note he left the evening before. But here's the thing, the author didn't write that note. That's not his handwriting. Footsteps was originally pictured as a one-off, and it works as its own story. The situation the author finds himself in is terrifying, and the twist is freaky. Due to reader demand, he made a sequel and eventually turned it into a series. The previous first, and now this second installment, open a lot like 1999. Balloons starts with the author describing an assignment in elementary school where they wrote letters and attached them to balloons in order to send them out and find a pen pal to write to. Something about teaching kids about community. An important detail is that the author sends along $1 with his letter so that his hypothetical pen pal can buy stamps. When his mystery pen pal sends something back, all he gets is a blurry Polaroid picture. He starts getting more of these blurry Polaroids, so much that he has an entire drawer in his bedroom full of them. We're introduced to Josh, the main character's best friend. He's going to be very important in the rest of this. That summer, he and MC set up a lemonade stand in their front yard, and MC realizes that the $1 he sent with his letter came back to them. He's pretty surprised. Later, he looks at all the Polaroids again and sees something else interesting. They're all pictures of him. Not close-ups, of course, but these are all clearly pictures of him taken from afar. His mom is freaked out and starts calling the cops, because what's even worse is that none of them have any postage or anything. They were dropped off directly at his house or school by someone. Okay, I'll spoil it. The main antagonist of the story isn't a ghost or cryptid or science experiment gone wrong. The pen pal in Pen Pal is a stalker. The story is grounded in reality, and that's where the horror comes from. Chapter 2 takes place before the first, setting up the events that led to Footsteps, and MC's introduction to the person that would change his life forever, in the worst way. Chapter 3, Boxes, is named after the main character's pet cat. It's set up early on how Boxes would sneak off and into the crawl space below MC's house. Whenever the cat would go missing, they'd know to look there. It also sets up MC's move to the city, which is a big point in the story and impacts his relationship with Josh a whole lot. Mom looks below the crawl space one last time to see if Boxes is down there, and is a little disturbed by what she does find. Coincidentally, they move away from the house early on that same day, leaving a bunch of their stuff behind. Later on, when MC moves to the city, Boxes runs away again and doesn't come back. While visiting Josh back in his hometown, he figures that the cat ran all the way back to their old house. The rest of the story involves the two kids hatching a plan to sneak over there and get the cat back. back. The old house is now a house of horrors, as it looks like somebody's squatting there. Below the crawlspace is a bunch of dead animals, and all of MC's old clothes are hung up in the closet. Along the wall are those same Polaroids, including ones of him and Josh. This chapter has another twist ending, and while I think overall the story is very well put together, the reliance on twists at the end of every chapter gets repetitive. The fourth chapter flashes back to before the last. I know, the timeline is very confusing. This is before the main character moves away. He and Josh build a raft in order to map out the area around their houses, and come across this old lady who lives in the neighborhood. She isn't quite all there and claims that her dead husband finally came back, whatever that means, when in reality, she's being tricked by the pen pal. And the people from the morgue come next morning to drag her body away. The idea here, I suppose, is that the pen pal is killing these people out of jealousy. Makes sense given what we see from him later on, especially next chapter, which is also the weakest. This is a lot later on. He and Josh haven't spoken in a while, both now in their teens. Josh's sister Veronica is introduced as a sort of love interest, but is killed off later as that chapter's trademark pen pal twist. Before he's aware of her death, MC gets a couple of texts from her asking to see him at the movies. He goes and she's not there, but a mysterious, smelly, older man sits next to him instead. That's the guy. That's the pen pal. That's the guy who killed the sister, so he could have the main character all to himself. The last chapter, Friends, is absolutely gut-wrenching. Here we find out that Josh had supposedly ran away, but that's not the case. Josh did try to finish the map of the neighborhood he and MC were making all those years back, but ran into you-know-who in the process. Josh's dad was the one to find the bodies. Yes, bodies. The pen pal's reign of terror is over, but he took Josh with him. It's a tragic ending to an unsettling story. Reading or listening to pen pal for the first time is an experience. It keeps you on your toes, makes you feel sick at certain points, but there's an odd sense of nostalgia throughout. Being stalked is a scary idea, and the tale pulls from all the kinds of fears a person can have regarding it. The main character isn't given a name or described in any real detail, so it's easy to project onto him. The villain is intentionally left vague, so your imagination fills in all the details. Bits of it are kind of bad and don't hold up. The sister character is only really used as a plot point, and certain very understandable things about Josh's family are brought up at the end with no real build-up. A Reddit comment also points out how unrealistic it is that the narrator doesn't realize anything going on until he's older, and after seriously considering it, I agree. But as far as creepypastas go, the bar is not too high, let's be honest. The pen pal author eventually made a Kickstarter to publish it as a novel, and eventually got released a year later. There are several differences between the no sleep posts and the book from what I read online, obviously longer, and I assume with mentions of Reddit removed. It's like when Abandoned by Disney got published and they had to call it Dandyland. Is pen pal the best creepypasta? I think it's up there. It's not formatted like any kind of urban legend or historical account, but is still an effective work of horror. It's elevated above a lot of others. It's like your bone-chilling, jump-scare-free, atmospheric, character-driven, slow-burn horror film from A24 versus like The Conjuring 5 or the Rake movie. Guys, I just found out about this really cursed video you can't watch anymore. It's real though, trust me. The cursed picture, video, website, etc. We've seen them before and we're looking at more today. I really think it must have been The Ring that brought the idea into the public consciousness. You know, watch the video and in 7 days you die. A well-known internet counterpart is the Sony picture. Legend says that this picture was of a Japanese schoolgirl who did herself in, and if you stare at the picture for a certain amount of time, you feel the urge to do it too. Believe it or not, this turned out to be a hoax, and the piece is actually from some artist based on a screenplay he was writing. To anyone who believes in internet death curses, I grew up in the age of them and I survived to this day, so I don't want to hear anyone whining about the cursed Gacha Life TikTok video they just watched. At least in that case, you can probably find it again, unlike what we're going to talk about today. The Grifter and Satan Sphinx are two cursed videos that are so similar I might as well lump them into one episode. The Grifter was originally posted on 4chan's Export in the late 2000s, and according to Creepypasta.com, all who viewed it were killed, with a mysterious doll left at the site. Accounts of what the Grifter contains can vary. The 4chan screenshot here mentions a sink full of maggots, while a creepypasta going more into the video details a lot of differences, including real footage of demonic possessions, a bunch of seemingly not intact baby bodies, and a message about a demon called the Grifter that terrorized the Balkan region about 30 years ago. The actual video of the Grifter on YouTube isn't anything like that. It shows a dark hallway with some maggots and flashes of other random imagery, including this baby. Obviously, 250,000 people have have watched this and haven't keeled over, so it's not cursed. Most of the footage here is taken from the Czech film Little Otik, but who knows, maybe the real version of the grifter is out there. For some reason, the grifter is always associated with this picture of a skeleton baby. I have no idea where it comes from. The origin has been traced back to a story called The Ugly Boy, but even that happens to be a repost. Here's the unedited version that looks even creepier. I thought this was edited, but I think the kid just might look like that. I'm sorry. Nothing like this is ever said to appear in the grifter video, and this is a common spooky creepypasta image I've seen in plenty of thumbnails. Speaking of images, Satan's Sphinx. I hate that picture. Something about the ears on the guy on the right and the big snoot, I don't like it. It creeps me out. Satan's Sphinx is another cursed video, with a lot of mystery surrounding it even today. It first popped up around the same time as the grifter, said to be banned by the US government due to the effects it has on people. The belief is that the video contains flashing effects, gore, and other spooky, scary things. Nobody really knows where the first mention of Satan's Sphinx comes from. The earliest known mention was a Yahoo Answers thread from 2009, where a user asks about it, and some guy is like, it's banned for a reason, don't look into it. YouTuber Scare Theater did a whole 3-part video on Satan's Sphinx, and received a whole bunch of correspondence from people who supposedly made it or were involved in it. One guy said he worked for the government, and that the video was actually used to torture people. Another said they made it as a prank for their friend, but their friend eventually ended up ending up, if you know what I mean. Scare Theater came to a conclusion after a third user messaged them saying that they made the video, and supposedly the still frame from it is actually an album cover from a band they like. Well, later on, another channel called Cellureal disputes that, noting how the date the anonymous emailer started the rumor doesn't line up with when the Yahoo Answers thread was created.
Banned by the government due to its horrifying and disturbing content.
I'm not watching that shit. Not doing it.
The picture also dates back further than the album the Anon mentions, and is agreed to be 2 people from somewhere in Europe dressed up like the Krampus. So now we're left with no real answer as to where the rumor started. My best guess is that there's some lost thread on X that has the original mention of the video that the public has yet to find, obviously. Or maybe the government really is censoring the video because they don't know the power that it has. Dun dun dun! The greatest creepypastas are always the ones that have an aura of realism to them. I've brought it up, if you say something about a scary video or cryptid with enough confidence, it's bound to make people believe it's real. The Rake, Pokemon Creepy Black or Lavender Town, Normal.com, the Russian sleep experiment. Experiment pastas especially can fool people. Most internet dwellers at the time took anything at face value when it was written like a Wikipedia article. So why then did the Harbinger experiment choose not to go in that direction? The story is written from the perspective of a scientist, let's call him Victor. Victor loses his job for stealing medication, and in the search for a new job is contacted by the mysterious Dr. Zimmerman. Based on the story, here's my rendition of what he looks like. Zimmerman is attempting to prove the existence of the supernatural by conducting an experiment out in the middle of nowhere, Alaska. In a deep dark underground compound, he locks 3 test subjects in 3 different chambers, and then he chants in an evil cult language and summons a demon, and the demon possesses a guy and kills a bunch of the scientists, and it plays Living in the Sunlight by Tiny Tim because Tiny Tim is scary. Victor is the only survivor, and he can still hear the song, and he warns us that the demon is still out there, and it's gonna get you too. Like the British sleep experiment, this story commits the cardinal sin of having a cartoonishly nefarious mad scientist as one of its central characters. Not only that, but the inclusion of nondescript demonic chanting and possession isn't doing the story any favors. It doesn't read like a horror story, rather an intro for some shovelware first-person shooter game. The subject matter is too unbelievable, and the author doesn't describe it in any scary way. It reminds me of the things you read in school when you learn about early science fiction. I call the main character Victor because it's written like Frankenstein from 1816. The main character is like, oh, that accursed beast 'twas unleashed upon the world. And buddy, it's 2011. Imagine if the Russian sleep experiment was written in first person with named characters and the author describing how mortified he was at every turn. It wouldn't be as effective or well remembered. Would have been another random horror story. There are interesting things about Harbinger, like the way the experiment compound is set up being this weird, winding mess of hallways. Details like that could have been eerie if you described them differently. The Tiny Tim song is a weird choice. I get that his voice can be creepy to some people, but there's no reason some random demon would have that playing. The author just thought it was creepy and put it in their story. It's not even one of the creepy ones, it's the one they play in the SpongeBob pilot. Get out of here. After reading the story, I was debating scrapping this episode and doing Polybius instead.
This game apparently caused odd reactions to the people who played it, so hey, I'm the gamer from Mars and this is the Polybius theory.
I decided not because A, I already invested time into Harbinger, and B, I don't think I'd be prepared to watch the Polybius movie.
You think this game?
Episode of The Simpsons entitled Please Homer, Don't Hammer M. Bart is playing in an arcade, and in the background there's a Polybius machine with the words Property of US Government stamped on it.
Formats come and formats go, but horror is still horror. The adoption of the internet by the mainstream presented so many new avenues of storytelling and lowered the barrier to entry, might I add. This is how Creepypasta came to be, by anyone being able to post anything for people around the world to see. Yeah, we know how the internet works, get on with it. In the year 2000, a man named Ted Hegeman created a site to document his experiences in a mysterious cave. The blog starts out normal, but slowly things in the cave start to get more disturbing. It begins with a small passage that he and his friend decide to open up by drilling around the opening. Weird sounds like rock rubbing against rock, and some kind of animal scream, and a wind coming from inside the cave pique the curiosity of the two. One time they bring the friend's dog, and the dog starts freaking out at something seemingly down there in the cave. Ted himself finally manages to squeeze inside the tight hole shown by this really creepy picture. Not creepy as in the guy is creepy as in I'd hate to be there. Mind you, this has taken some length underground inside the cave, so he and his friend had to climb down and then he has to get inside there. On the other side of the hole, he finds some kind of old cave painting or hieroglyphic, as well as a big round rock. He and his friend get another guy to go down in the cave, and when he comes back out of the hole, he's pale white and seemingly sick because of something in the cave. Ted ventures into the hole and the worst happens. There's some attention given to their sources of light when they're down there in the cave earlier on. You know, setups and payoffs. All of Ted's lights go out and he's trapped in there, in the dark. In his mad scramble to get out, he injures himself and starts getting horrible sensations all over his body. He finds that round rock is now gone with some kind of passage revealed to be under it. While escaping, he and his friend feel something. Something inside the cave is pulling at their harnesses from the rope. Thankfully, Ted is alive to tell the tale, but, you know, barely. He recovers over the course of a few months. During that time, he's incredibly anxious and starts seeing things out of the corner of his vision. Somehow, he and the other sick guy who saw the inside of the hole meet up and are both drawn back to the cave. Ted decides to go in there with a gun and figure out what's in there once and for all. He promises to return with answers, but he never posted again. This is, to our knowledge, the first creepypasta. It was a horror story posted online that follows a regular guy and his believable supernatural experiences. And that ending, or lack thereof, it's perfect. He goes down into the cave and is never to return. There's nothing that's truly explained, but enough to be scary and dangerous. The main character is in serious danger. It's written like this is a real guy, and that's because most of what happens in the story is based on his real experiences caving. Everything except, you know, whatever's in there is real. Even the dog. A lot of time in the story is dedicated to not so noteworthy descriptions of their materials and techniques, showing us, the reader, that this guy clearly knows a lot about caving. It makes us, even subconsciously, buy whatever he says about what's in there. It's a perfect example of how to use the internet to tell spooky stories, and it came out at the turn of the millennium. It takes advantage of the available formats, at the time, text and pictures. A thing a lot of people might not consider is how the change in font and color for passages he writes later on. It's subtle, but another use of the tools he had. Online video, interactive sites, etc. brought even more unique stories with them, but the creepypasta stories we know today started with this. It started with a guy, a cave, and whatever was down there. It's 2014. Everywhere you go, you can't escape Frozen. The ALS Ice Bucket Challenge is all over YouTube. Taylor Swift and Maroon 5 have complete dominance over the radio, and the search term creepypasta reaches an all-time high. The creepypasta fandom for a time had been growing, from random urban legends shared around disparate forums, to a fan base consolidating these tales on a select few sites. Not only spooky stories, but popular characters, who reigned supreme in the eyes of teenage admirers. Creepypasta was so popular that it bled over into the real world, in the worst way possible. In May 2014, an event occurred referred to as the Slender Man stabbings. I'll spare everyone the details, but thankfully the victims survived. The two perpetrators claimed that they had committed the act to summon Slender Man so that they could become his minions and live with him in the woods. The attackers were not groomed into doing it on some website. They acted independently in the name of some delusion involving the character. Didn't change the fact that Slender Man became an incredibly touchy subject after. Looking at search analytics, you can see a fall off in the term creepypasta right after coverage surge began. With this in mind, you could be like, yeah, this is why we don't have creepypasta anymore. And if I trudge up my own personal experience around the time, I don't blame you for thinking that. But I don't believe that's the case. Not everyone on the internet turned around and said, yeah, this is kind of awkward, we're out of here. No, what I think happened, largely, was something a lot more interesting. At the height of its popularity, the audience for creepypastas had a lot of different and almost conflicting interests. A lot of different people wanted different things out of it. And this is 2014, mind you. Online culture was about to make a major general shift in the next few years. When new media and trends came along that fed the appetites for those interests, people moved on. For example, if you really liked the serial killer aspect of creepypastas, the blood and gore, you might have moved on to true crime when that community started gaining traction. And if you were like me and loved lost episode creepypastas because they were eerie things related to your favorite media, you might have started to take an interest in lost media. A lot of that was like lost episodes, but in real life. And if you're one of those people who like to watch PewDiePie play Slender the 8 Pages and scream his guts out, then you might have heard of a little indie game called
Five Nights at Freddy's.
I think FNAF had the largest migration from the creepypasta fandom. A lot of the audience for online horror content seemed like it was diverted wholly to that game. It had the scares, it had the atmosphere, it had the story, it had the nostalgia, it had the shippable characters. If you want to put it in the context of what happened with Slender Man, there was a relative safety with FNAF. Aside from the playground rumors about Freddy Fazbear's Pizza being on Google Maps, there was never any question if it was fake. And that's good considering the audience for the games and creepypasta were made up of a lot of children. Previously, there was a race to write the next big creepypasta, to make the next big character. In the mid-2010s, it seemed like the new meta was to make the next FNAF. Bendy, Hello Neighbor, Baldi's Basics, Doki Doki Literature Club. There was an infrastructure built up between games, let's players, and fan creators. It was this synergy that only existed a tiny bit with creepypasta. I've brought up in this series how creators have to see merch and other for-profit things made of their characters, but with the rise of indie horror, there was a lot more control you could have over how your characters were used. There was officially licensed Baldi merch in Toys R Us when they were still around. This also meant creators could wring as much money out of children as they wanted to, for better or for worse. I guess people back then didn't realize how good things were before it became Leany Boog. More mature internet horror made a comeback. We have analog horror that's been around since like 2016. Some of the stupid stuff from creepypasta came back and made its way into that too. The more things change, the more they stay the same. Nostalgia for old creepypastas reared its head towards the beginning of the 2020s, though I think Slender Man hasn't quite evolved past the stigma. It's beginning to, but it'll take something big to see a new wave of nostalgic Slender art, the way we see Sonic.exe or Smile Dog. The guy was pretty much untouchable for the rest of the 2010s. And then they made a movie. I think I'll end by saying that the spirit of creepypastas lives on, if it wasn't obvious already. Next time you watch a spooky analog horror or see sexy anime art of the next big mascot horror game, remember what came before. Happy Halloween, and be safe. You don't know what's out there in the woods.